As we see the current crop of heavyweights at the end of their careers, the twilights, Fury's retired again. AJ's probably only got a couple of fights left. Usyk himself's 37. He hasn't got that. He probably doesn't want to do it that much more. Wilder's not got that much longer left. We are asked a very interesting question, which is that we have a lot of young heavyweights on the way through. And if any of them got the star power and the commercial power to not be a flop to the division, because from a perspective of the history of the sport, it's a cycle. Everything is cyclical. Everything comes and goes, and there is nothing new under the sun. In the 70s, in the late 70s, when Ali retired, he left a void, and that void was partially filled by Larry Holmes, who took over as the heavyweight champion. But no one cared, because the era before it, the Ali era, which had, the Thriller in Manila, you had him and Frazier. You had George Foreman. He took over from Sonny Liston. It just had destroyers in that era. And it was a time when, if you weren't watching it on your new TV, which was quite new back then, you know what I'm saying, you were listening to it on the radio. It was the sport of the people. Everyone cared about it. If you weren't a fan of boxing, you just weren't a fan of sport. And that's what it is. Then in the late 70s, when he retired, like I said, Larry Holmes took over. No one really cared. And also he beat up Ali, and that never done him any good PR favours. The era of Holmes was a little bit of a dip. But that's not surprising, because you're talking about the greatest, right? He could fight, he could speak, he could promote, he could do everything, absolutely everything. And he had the perfect foils and the perfect counterparts to have unbelievable rivalries, unbelievable fights. It was the perfect storm. After that, you're unlikely to get that. After the Holmes era, though, we saw a just explosion in the heavyweight division. Mike Tyson brought up just a golden era. Youngest heavyweight champion of all time. This phenom, this marketing dream. Looks like a pit bull, fights just like a ravenous animal. You saw him on Pepsi adverts. He had his own computer game. He was everywhere. Every single endorsement you could possibly have. He was mainstream upon mainstream. What can you say? From that, with that man at the helm of the heavyweight division, in come other killers. Holyfield comes up from cruiserweight, becomes undisputed champion a couple of times. You have Riddick Bowe. You have Herbie Hyde on our side. You have Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis, who eventually took over the division. Who else did you have? You have Michael Moore. George Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion. All of these things are factors to what makes an exciting heavyweight era, right? Tommy Morrison, the Great White Hope. Ray Mercer. You know what I mean? Like there were just great fighters in that era. After that era, much like what the cycle has shown us before, sadly, after Lennox stepped down as the last undisputed champ before Usyk, got a bit dark. Got a little bit dark, got a little bit boring, got a little bit, fights were only happening in stadiums in Germany, despite this, HBO tried, right? In that era, which was known as a very bad era for boxing, especially at heavyweight, but it gave other weights a chance to become superstars, right? The heavyweight era, everyone stopped caring about it. We had a couple of little flickers to the flame, as it were. We thought David Haye could be the one to bring us out, come up from cruiserweight, become unified champ. Roy Jones went up, he won a world title, he was juiced to the tits, but that's fine. James Toney won a world title for, there was interesting fighters in that era, but ultimately the rulers of that division were not fun. But then that gave way to the current era that we're in now. Let's not forget that Fury took Klitschko's belts in Germany in a horrifically boring performance, but a masterclass in just out Klitschkoing Klitschko. He needs to be given more credit for that. That was a very different Klitschko than the one that AJ beat, who also great fight. But when you look at the things that make the interesting eras beyond interesting, right? You're talking about it's a mix of vulnerability, personality, marketability, obviously fightability. In the current era we had here, we've got AJ, Under Armour, Hugo Boss, the looks the part, speaks the part, is the part, the statesman. You got Fury, the wild dude. Everything about that man does not make sense. Not just his mental state, but the size he is, the way he moves, the way he fights, the skill set, all of that stuff. You have Wilder, just the nuclear punch-powered man. Just crazy. And you know what? He doesn't get enough credit for being as tough as he is, right? Then Usyk. Usyk, this scary, comparatively to them, he's 6'3", 6'4", comparatively to them boys who are huge, huge, a little guy. Little guy comes up and just cooks them, becomes undisputed champion. Usyk is incredibly marketable. He's interesting. He's funny. He's a good character. You can put him on a mic and you can have a lot of fun in hearing what he's got to say. But also at any moment, he's got this sinister vibe to him where you just look at him and you're like, you might poison me, you. Right? Fury, put the geezer on a mic. You never know what you're going to get, but I guarantee you're going to get views and you're going to get clicks. AJ is going to always get views because of who he is. Wilder, the same, but from a very different energy. So then, with them boys all on their way out, and Usyk having 3 of the 4 belts, which leads us to the new generation, the next generation, there's always a little bit of a crossover. So in the crossover gens, you got Dan Dubois and Joe Parker who are fighting each other on February 22nd. Dan Dubois is the IBF champ. Is he fun to listen to? No. Can he fight? 100%. Is he in a career resurgence, uptick, whatever you want to say? 100%. He's just had the best performance that he's ever had. A couple of fights ago, we saw him get stopped and kind of quit against Usyk, the number 1. He knocked out AJ bad. All good. Let's see what happens. He's been on a bit of a tear. But from a commercial standpoint, not so much for Dan. There's going to be a lot of work to make him a superstar, right? He would have to, I don't even know what you would have to do with Dan Dubois to make him the heir apparent. The only thing that I can really think is that if they make the Usyk rematch, like we said, the Usyk rematch could lead to an anomalous moment where Usyk gets destroyed by Dan Dubois, which I can't, like, what, under what parameters could that happen? You know what I mean? Under what parameters is Usyk? Crazy. But on the unbelievably remote chance that that happens and Dan Dubois becomes undisputed heavyweight champion off of what we've all consensus to agreed to be a amazing heavyweight, he could trigger enough interest, but also he becomes vulnerable because we've seen Dan get stopped twice, right? He is vulnerable. If he did beat Usyk in some twist of fate, that is chumming the water. You think Fabio don't fancy it with Fabs? Fabio Wardley, 30 years old. He is the number 1 contender for the WBA belt. He would be all over that in a heartbeat. Heartbeat. Moses would fancy that. 20 years old. Absolute destroyer of a young man. And he's only 20. The difference, I mean, like, I don't want to do the quick maths for you. The difference between 20 and 30, 10 years, mate. 10 years. And Moses is young. There's a Aussie or Kiwi boy called Justice Honey. He's only 25. He's got good hands. He's got potential. But then he kind of, for me as it stands now, if you look at that crop of new heavyweights, he kind of fits into, like, how rude for me to say it, the Charles Martins, kind of like could be a contender, could be something, but he's got a lot of development. You know, I don't want to talk about Johnny Fisher just yet. I love Johnny, but it's not there yet, right? Laurence Okolie, former 2-weight champion, up now at heavyweight, could be a threat to the division. But again, who you put a mic in front of these guys, there's only one of this list that I've got in front of me here that I can actually listen to and believe what he says, and that is Fabio Wardley. Fabio Wardley, for me, he speaks, he's violent. He's massive. He's athletic. He is explosive. He does everything that you need. And I think in the wake of Usyk stepping down and the belts disbanding, he is the one that probably has the most likelihood to the star power. Now, obviously, we've got Martin Okolie, who's only 31. Martin Okolie is a destroyer, and he is a very scary man. And you could imagine him being a unified champ. I don't think he could be undisputed. Well, who knows? Who knows? But when you line it up, like Okolie would fancy it with Okolie. That's a sick rhyme as well. I think Fabs would fancy it. Dan Dubois, you know, I wouldn't for the kind of fighter that Okolie is, you're gonna have to deal with someone who's gonna swarm you like Okolie, that you're gonna have to have enough power about you to really make him question things. From the perspective of the sport itself, the business itself, now we've got Turki Alashihk, who is an investor, a very active investor in boxing. I think in a dream situation, either Dan Dubois becomes undisputed in the Usyk rematch, which is one of Turkey's 5 fights for 2025, right? And the new era just kicks off, right? It just ignites, and that's maybe what they're hoping for. Or Usyk beats Dubois. Dubois has to rebuild a little bit because he is still very young, and he's also got his hands full with Joe Parker. If Joe Parker beats Dubois, then you'll see for sure Joe Parker AJ 2, where AJ then wants that third fight with Usyk. It is what it is. Who knows? Stars do what they want, right? In the States, you got Torres. We don't really know that much about Torres. You got Jared Anderson, who got fed to Okolie for God knows what reason. Those two are the only real US heavyweights of any sort of merit, and we should be seeing them out more. This video would be very easy to just be chatting about Moses and how he's the heir apparent, right? And he probably is, but he is only 20, and he is high ranked for the WBO. So what we might get Fabio being WBA regular champion. We might see Moses being WBO interim champion. And then what we might see is some sort of mad Turki Alashihk Riyadh season. Usyk has retired. The belts have disbanded. And every single one of those belts is held by an individual champion. Then we have champion versus champion versus champion versus champion. Then unified champion versus unified champion. And then we have another wave of undisputed, right? So providing that the platform, the exposure, and the promotion is good enough, which we know now it is, and they are all working together, which was always the hindrance, right? The hindrance was that we saw that the promoters would not work together. That now has been eliminated. So we could maybe see, with not that much imagination, maybe a dilution of what it means to be undisputed, because you may see 4 belts start getting passed around to one another. Would that be the worst thing? Who knows? Let me know in the comments. I personally think that the new crop of heavyweights has a lot of potential, and Fabio is, for me, the top pick to lead the division forward, with the asterisk that Martin Okolie does terrify me and does scare me quite heavily. But that's just me. Like, rate, subscribe.